Hello, welcome back to Big LEZ'S League. And yes, you do get to see my ugly mug yet again on YouTube. We are going to be talking with the great Lee Addison. He's making his return to my podcast as well. It has been a long time. He's pretty much been on hiatus in terms of being on my podcast, but at the same time, been quite busy. Lee, how are you going?
Mate, I mustn't be going too bad because I've had this t-shirt on for the last couple of hours, and then just before I came on the pod, I thought to myself, I wore this on one of Big Les's podcasts a year and a half ago. So I mustn't have put too much weight on me. I must be going all right.
Well, that's a good thing. That's a great
how,
sign.
how are you going, more importantly?
I mean, good. Been very, very busy. I think we both have as well. You've obviously
Yep.
got a lot of things going on in your line of work as well.
Mm,
You've had a great sort of 12 months, haven't you?
mm. We've now racked up 64 clinics in 2.5 years, over 3,500 kids. That's the in-person stuff, and then online we're well over 40 countries that the website goes to. So yeah, I do feel in the last 12 to 18 months we broke through from being if you like, a bit of a provider to being a real serious provider that people a provider of choice. And the best thing I can tell you, mate, is the future for the business is looking really good because we're going to be making some big announcements soon. So if people keep an eye on Rugby League Coach on socials, they'll know pretty soon. The business has been on sale for a while, and I am this close, mate, to being able to announce something. So for those listening, I did a gesture that suggested a very small size.
Well, there you go. I'm very keen to see, how where this goes. I already know, but I'm going to let you announce it. Obviously, we don't want to give too much away on your end. What we're going to be doing today, ladies and gents, is going through our ladder for next year. Now, I thought it's all good and well for a guy that runs a podcast to come on and say, oh, I think this team's going to be here. I think this team's going to be there. But I thought it's always good to get a coach's perspective as well.
Mm,
Obviously, he's
mm,
been involved with many NRL clubs himself and has
mm.
coached for a very long period. So I thought it'd always be good to get a coach's perspective on all of these things as well. I think that's always a good idea. So we're going to be going through both of our predictions, which, we already do have a little bit of disagreement on some of the positions as well, but we're going to be going through some of the positions where we think teams are going to be. We're going to go from 17 all the way to number one. And obviously, then you'll know what our ladder predictions for next year are going to be. So we'll start off with the wooden spoon because I think that's the most exciting. Who do you have, Lee? Before I give away who I have, who do you have getting your wooden spoon next year?
Well, to me, it's a straight shootout between the Tigers and the Dragons. The Dragons, I think, there's still quite a lot wrong at that club. Sorry, I think the appointment of Shane Flanagan was a good one, but I think he's got a real clean up job. The bookies are rarely wrong with these kind of things, and they've got the Dragons firming as the wooden spooners. I do think they're going to look better, but I just think that some of the behaviour of some of their players over the last couple of years, and unfortunately Ben Hunt making it quite clear he wanted out of the joint, I don't think that bodes too well. So I think a little bit of a fractured place still, but I do think that Dragons fans need to have a lot of optimism for the future, but it could be short-term pain for long-term gain. The Tigers, they just go from one catastrophe to another, and I actually really feel sorry for their chairman, Leo Hadjipentalis. I think I like the way he fronts up to the media. He's obviously a smart guy. Meanwhile, the CEO seems to hide away and not talk to anyone in the media. And even when the chairman was voted back in, there's been some kind of review led by fans, apparently, that has led to more turbulence. So I just think that club, and I also think the appointment of Benji a year early isn't a great sign either. So Dragons or the Tigers for me. I could literally interchange them 16th and 17th. Big
Okay.
Les, sorry to sit on the fence, but 16 and 17, Tigers or Dragons. Flip a coin.
All right. Gun to head. Who are you picking? Got to get one. If you had to pick.
Tigers, because I've suggested that the Dragons will have some improvement in them. So yeah, let's go Tigers.
All right. I have gone the Dragons. I think that the Tigers, I think it's going to be impossible for them to get as low as they have. And we said this last year as well, and we were obviously proven very wrong. But even with Benji at the helm, I think it's going to be impossible to go as bad as they had been this year with some of the signings that come in. They've now got for sure, 7. They've got options in the 6. They can go for a really young Latu Finu, who's obviously going to get a run in the top side, or they can go for a Jaden Sullivan, who they actually got from St. George. I think that they can go a lot better. Doreen Buller at fullback was outstanding, and you could sort of see towards the back end of the year, I think, for the Tigers as well, that a little bit more of want to win, which we sort of at the start of the year, that's what we were looking for from the Tigers when they were playing some pretty poor footy to start the year. We just wanted to see that want to win. You know, Luke Brooks was out. Adam Dewey obviously got injured. They had a ton of injuries, and the want slowly started to fade away. But towards the end, when Doreen Buller came into fullback, when they had a pretty consistent halves pairing, yes, the 5'8" was chopping and changing most weeks, but we sort of knew what the halves pairing towards the back end of the year was going to be, and it was a little bit more consistent. We actually saw a little bit of better footy, and we saw them having the want to win. I think with all of the new players coming in, your Aiden Caesars, your Jaden Sullivans, your Latu Finus, I really do think that things are going to change slowly. I think they are going to go up a little bit more, and I think the top teams are going to be the top teams next year, but the comp's going to even out a lot more. So there's not going to be much difference between last and 10th. I think it's going to be very, very even. I think that's going to be like 4 or 5 points between 10th and last. I think it's going to be very even. I think the Dragons, especially if Ben Hunt walks out the door at some stage next year, I think the Dragons are going to come last. I just don't see it really. Yes, Shane Flanagan's a great appointment at head coach, but I think it's not a 1-year turnaround, which a lot of people do like to see these days with clubs. I think it's going to be longer than that. So I've got the Dragons to get the spoon. They are the favourites. I've got them to get the spoon. Now, 16, you've obviously gone with the Dragons. You're high on the Shane Flanagan signing. What else for you, I guess, puts them above the Tigers?
Well, one thing, just as you were talking then, I was reflecting on what you were saying, and the podcast we did last year. And one great thing about you and I when we do podcasts together, my first instinct is to look at the coaching and the off-field issues in terms of the structure of the club. Your first instinct is always to look from the cattle, from the players, and then we tend to meet in the middle. And I put the Tigers below the Dragons simply because I think the Tigers is more of a basket case and they have an inexperienced coach. The Dragons, I think that with their experienced coach, they're going to get better. If Ben Hunt becomes happy again, then I think they are going to be a kind of team that knocks a couple of sides out off track as the year goes on, but they're going to struggle to sustain it throughout the year. And I also think that they obviously have a roster that is very unbalanced in terms of the young players are quite young, the older players are quite old, and whatnot. So, this is where I severely agree with you. It's not going to be a 1-year fix at that place. And to me, they are clearly the 2 worst franchises at the minute in the NRL. And it's also no coincidence they're the 2 merged clubs. I think they've got so many issues. And one thing I've learned in my coaching career is if the off-field is turbulent, you've got almost no chance on field. The old master coach, Jack Gibson, the line gets trotted out all the time. Winning starts at the front office. And I think you'd agree with me there, mate, that the Dragons and the Tigers front offices aren't the benchmark.
Yeah, look, I agree with that. I think if there's 2 clear bottom sides, I think it has to be the Dragons and the Tigers. They both have the potential to get up there, but they are the 2 at the minute. I think next year there's going to be some improvement from the Tigers. We'll talk about that in a second when we go through the rest of my ladder. But I think where we both disagree a little bit for the Tigers, but at the moment, at the back end of 2023, if you had to pick the 2 bottom franchises, I do agree with you there. It's got to be the Tigers and the Dragons. I do see a little bit of improvement with the cattle, as you said, that they're getting next year. I think that it's going to be improving a little bit. Whereas the Dragons, for me, they haven't signed anyone that really stands out for me. I think they do need someone to sign another marquee guy, especially if you do get a Ben Hunt. Even if he signs somewhere else in 2025, it's still going to hurt I guess, the feeling around the club as well. Ben Hunt for 2020 signs with the Brisbane Broncos. You know, it's going to hurt a lot of the guys in there. And when your main guy wants to leave, it does hurt the core. I think that's a little bit of a clearer difference as well between the Tigers and the Dragons. I think that, the main guy isn't saying, I want to get out of here at the Tigers as well. And I think that's going to prove dividends going into next year. My 16th is the Dolphins. And I think that's a bit of a smoky, and a lot of people do have them to improve next year with a lot of their signings. But again, I think it's a work in progress at the Dolphins. And with how even everyone is, and with all the guys I do see improving, they do go down a little bit. I think that, yes, they're getting a lot of really good players, but next year's going to be figuring out who's playing fullback, who's playing 5'8", who's playing halfback, what is the plan going into the next few years to be successful. I don't think the plan is to be successful. I mean, everyone wants to be successful as an NRL club. Who doesn't? But it's more so about how do we become successful and what is our plan going into the next few years. And I think with that, you've got a bunch of other clubs that have figured that out already. And that's what separates the Dolphins from everyone else for me a little bit, is that the Dolphins haven't figured that out yet. And that's a product of them being a new club. But I think it is going to hurt them going into next year. Yes, they could blood a really good spine early and get some success. And then that's what makes them, a bit of a higher team for me as well. If they do blood the spine early and get some real success at the start of the season like they did last year, that could be the difference. But for me, I do think it's going to take a little bit of time for them to do that, which is why I've got them a little bit lower. What do
Can you remind me where Dolphins actually finished in the ladder? Because I know they finished outside the 8. That's all I can remember, to be honest with you.
They didn't get into the 8. I think they were quite high up. They were 13th, so they were towards the bottom end of the barrel. But they did have a really big start, and I think that's what got them up there a little bit more than us compared to other teams. And they were winning games, and obviously Cody Nikorima had some really solid games. When Sean O'Sullivan came back, I thought they played really well. Hammer played really well at fullback, and even in the centers he played well. But they're getting a whole new spine again. And there's rumor after rumor about what this spine is going to be. They haven't really figured it out yet, and I think that's
Les and Lee will be in the spine.
Well, listen, I can definitely have a little bit of a run around. I was a front rower in my day, so I don't know how I go in the spine.
Right. So you said at the start of the pod that we had a bit of a disagreement about a couple. This is the one that jumps out to me. I'm putting the Dolphins a lot higher up the ladder, mate. First of all, I'm going to start with players. I'm going to start with Herbie Farnworth and Thomas Flegler. I think Flegler's one of the best props in the competition. And I think Herbie Farnworth is one of the best centres in the competition. He could also be playing fullback. That might be the reasons he signed for Redcliffe Dolphins, because he has wanted to play fullback quite a lot. That was part of the discourse around him at Brisbane maybe a year ago. So that might answer some of your thoughts in and around that. Secondly, I tend to focus on what they did at the start of the season as opposed to what they did at the end, because everybody wrote them off. And when they beat teams, they beat them really well. They've actually beaten some really good teams this year. What they've got to do is add some consistency to what they do. What I know from being up here, mate, is that any of the best kids in this area, they've snapped up. So what's going to be coming through at the Dolphins in a year or two are some real good juniors that you and anybody who's not in and around here, we won't have them on the radar, right? I think the Dragons are going to be a lot higher. I'm going to put them, I might have to change this again, but I'm going to put them at 9th.
Yeah, I'll keep them at 9th for now, and then we'll see how we go when we go through the rest of it.
I'm going to put them at 9th because the one thing I've still not mentioned yet is the master coach.
Mm.
He's not coached teams to miss the finals that often, mate. So if you'd have said to us a year ago they're going to beat the Roosters in round one without a so-called marquee player, what would you have thought? You'd have thought I was crazy, wouldn't you? And that's because of what Wayne Bennett can do with players, and that is a happy club. I saw a LinkedIn post yesterday from one of their players. What was the prop called? Who was at South? Who's about 83 years
Nichols.
old?
Mark Nichols.
Hey?
Mark Nichols.
That's right. He did a LinkedIn post, and it was of himself, his wife, his kid, and Wayne Bennett in the changing rooms. And Mark Nichols said in the post that his wife said, "Sorry, Wayne, this is Wayne came over a second to get in the picture," and his wife said, "Sorry, Wayne, we're just doing a family portrait." And apparently Wayne said, "It was a good job on family then, isn't it?" And sat right next to him and got in the picture. And that's Wayne Bennett all over, I think. So, yeah, I'm putting the Dolphins a lot higher, mate. They are one club. They're one club pulling in one direction. And again, that stays with my theme of what I've said about the Dragons and the Tigers.
Yeah, well, look, I'm very keen to see, what happens, Lee. I've got them in a little bit of a different spot. I think it's going to be a lot harder for them to get used to. A lot of spine players. They've got a lot of depth going into next year as well, which is going to make it very interesting. But yeah, look, I'm very keen to see if you're right. Going into the next one, 15th, who have you got above the Dragons and the Tigers going into next year?
Bulldogs.
Bulldogs.
That's another club that is. It'd be too strong to say rotten to the core. It'd be too strong a phrase to say that, I think. But, they've recruited a lot of players last season that everybody forgets how many people tipped them for the 8 last year. Most media organizations were talking about top 4, top 8, and they barely scraped away from the wooden spoon position. That is a real difficult club to change. And again, I'm thinking about some of the personnel coming over. I think about Crichton. Crichton isn't the type of player that is going to change that club per se. He's obviously a very welcome addition. He's one of the best players in the NRL, but they lack something in the middle of the field. They lack direction in the halves. There's no point having a centre like Stephen Crichton if there's not going to be a defence that can muscle up and lock teams out for long periods. There's no point having a Steve Crichton if you don't have a game managing halves pairing that can give him the ball in the right places and a forward pack that can't create space for him to work in. So I'm thinking with the Bulldogs and looking at your ladder prediction, you've not got them too far away. I mean, the difference between me putting them in 15th and you where you've put them, I won't tell people where, but you're talking about it could be points difference or one win. So I think what we're doing at the bottom of this ladder is we're just arranging the mediocrity, I think.
I agree. And I think what I think separates the Bulldogs from a top 8 side is the fact that they've got the formula there now. They've got a decent formula. They've got one of the better hookers, or was one of the better hookers in the competition, obviously, when he was at Parramatta. They've got, Matt Burton, who can play well at 5'8", but he just needs an organising halfback. Toby Sexton did a really good job when he came in those first 2 weeks. Obviously, he was very unlucky to get knocked out in that second game that he played. But, I thought that he played really well coming in. And I thought he played that role of a organising halfback while having a little bit of X factor about him as well. They do have the formula, but I think what separates them from the top 8 team is they have the formula, but they're just putting the ingredients in the wrong spots. And it just say, like, think of it as making a soup. Like, think about making a soup, right? You put all the ingredients in, the veggies, the chicken, all the main parts, the soup, the stock, but they're putting it all in the wrong order. They're adding a little bit of this and that. It doesn't make the soup taste too nice. And by the end of it, the soup's a bit of it doesn't taste too nice. It doesn't taste too nice by the end of it, if that makes sense. Like making a hamburger as well. You can't put the bun on top of the veggies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Burton at halfback wasn't a success.
Yeah.
Jake Averillo in the centres was okay, but I'd prefer him at fullback. There was
sorry, mate. I was just going to say, I think the coach isn't what people thought he was as well. I think the coach is someone that has a good agent, that gets his name in the right places. He's got a lot to prove to me as a coach. I looked at some of those Bulldogs games this year from a tactical perspective as much as anything. And some of the defensive tactics were really poor. Some of the attacking tactics were really poor. So that coach has got an awful lot to prove, I think, as well. I mean, who had the best Penrith assistant coach this year? The Bulldogs or the Warriors, So, yeah, there's an awful lot wrong at that club from my perspective, mate.
Well, look, again, very keen to see what happens with the Bulldogs, but yeah, we don't have them in very different positions at all. My 15th team, and again, I think a little bit of a controversial one, and I have a feeling you're going to disagree a little bit, is the Gold Coast Titans. Yes, they're getting Desi in. Yes, Desi's a fantastic coach, but they have so many fullbacks right now. They have so many guys that can play multiple positions in their spine, where I just feel like it's going to be another year of chopping and changing. And we've seen it happen with the Brisbane Broncos when they got the spoon. We've seen it happen with a number of clubs now, the Tigers. When you chop and change your spine constantly throughout the year and you don't let spine members gel in specific positions or keep a consistent plan for a long time, you tend to not go too well. When you keep chopping and changing your halves every single week, your fullback every week, it doesn't tend to go well. And yes, they were unlucky at some stages during the season due to injury and stuff like that. But I really do think that it's just going to be another year of, I guess, taste testing for the Titans to really figure out how this team is going to look. What are your thoughts on the Titans being 15th?
I'm disagreeing with you. I'm going to put them in the 8. Here's a question for you, right? Did the Titans struggle to score points this year?
Not really, no.
No. They struggled to prevent the other team scoring points. They struggled to play a game for 2 halves. These are the kind of things that Des Hasler is renowned for fixing. He's renowned for a steal around the defensive formation of the team. He's renowned for his teams being tough. They don't, you think back to Desi's Manly teams, even if they were average, they rarely lost 2 games on the bounce. They rarely lost at home. And I think the Des factor is just what they need at the Titans. Do I think they're going to be a threat to the Premiership? Absolutely not. But I think there's every chance that they could scrape into the 8. And one thing about anybody I put in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, those positions could change just again. It's like any position in the NRL ladder. It's very hard to predict where somebody's going to finish until about 3 rounds to go, quite often, with the buys and everything else and whatnot. But the teams tend to be that close together in terms of wins and losses. The Titans could literally get into the 8 or just miss out. So I'm going to put them in 8th for now.
All right, I'll chuck him in 8th. And again, we'll see how that goes going into the rest of this prediction. But yeah, look, I've got the Titans 15th. 2 very different arguments as well. I'm very keen to see where the Titans finish. I think they definitely have the strike power and the attack to be a top 8 team. But I think that when, as I said before, a team constantly changes their spine, and I feel like it is going to be a wine tasting sort of year for the Gold Coast Titans in terms of figuring out where Keanu Keeney, AJ Brimson, Jaden Campbell, where these guys fit into the team, figuring out who the halfback is, because you've got obviously had a guy like Tom Weaver. He probably had the hardest debut ever going up against the Panthers and the Melbourne Storm in consecutive weeks and killed it. and for the first half of those games made Titans look like the better side. You've got Tanner Boyd, whose kicking game has been great, and there's been one thing that's kept the Titans in a lot of games this year. It's going to be hard to see where how this spine comes together. Foz is definitely the number 6. And I think the Des and Foz combo is going to be great, linking those two up again as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, look, I think it is going to be a wine tasting year for the Titans where they just need to figure out how this spine is going to look. And if it is a constant chop and change, then I think they are going to be around the bottom end of the ladder. But
sorry, mate. I think what's interesting, and hopefully the listeners are picking up on this, I can't literally sit here and disagree with anything you've just said about your justification for what will happen. And I dare say you couldn't really argue with me about my justification about what would happen. That is the great unknown, isn't it? And this is why it's so hard to predict some of these things, because the rosters aren't that different in some cases. It's about the quality of the coaching environment, the quality of the buy-in, the player unrest or otherwise, and these things are always really intriguing. And that's probably the patterns of the NRL at the minute. You can probably pick the top 2, 3, 4 quite easily. The rest are sort of all vying for that last 4 spots in the 8, So, really intriguing conversation, mate.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. And again, it's crazy to think how close the competition is. And I feel like that's why we do have a lot of guys in different positions as well, because they could just change like that with how close the competition is. And as you said before, with the buys and all the other factors coming into, putting together a ladder so early as well, it just makes it very interesting. And we could have 2 very different answers of how the ladder is going to look by the end of this as well. Who's your 14th team above the Bulldogs, the Dragons, and the Tigers?
Well, this is where it starts to become a little bit tricky, because I can't decide which one of these is going to slip furthest down, right? So I think the teams in free fall right now are the Eels, Canberra, and the Rabbits. All right. So I think they're the 3 teams that Canberra on a bit of a rebuild, evidenced by Ricky Stewart not taking the New South Wales job. The Eels, for me, their premiership window as well is truly shut. And they're even talking of moving Clint Gutherson around and Clint Gutherson offering his place up. They're scrambling, looking for a few answers there. They went from grand finalists to 9th, I think it was. So, that shows they either overachieved in 2022 or they would never, or they are on the way down now anyway. And then the other team, the Rabbits, I think we had a real strange collapse at the end of last season. I've never seen a team or a club go from being fancied to unfancied almost in the blink of an eye. It was such a catastrophic sort of change. So I think there's some soul searching needs to be done. Souths have been up there for most of the last decade. They're one of the clubs that have performed so well, but under the radar because they keep getting knocked out in prelims. But they have been consistent, and I just sense for the first time in a long time some inconsistency. I do rate their coach, but I just think the club needs to have a semi sort of rebuild. So I have gone a real roundabout way of saying that those 3 teams are going to drop. I'm going to put the Eels in 14th, mate. I think they're in the most trouble, and I think Brad Arthur might not last the year.
Well, look, it's a big call. It is definitely a big call. I disagree. I think that having Moses, Brown, and Gutho all together for a full year for the first time since Brown's debuted, because you got to remember, since Brown debuted to now, one of those guys has been out, whether it be Moses with injury, Brown obviously with some off-field incidents, Gutho with injury. One of these guys has been out pretty much every 3 or 4 games since Brown has come in and debuted for this side as well. So having them together for a full year, for me, is going to be a big focus for Brad Arthur. Having them all together playing footy for all 27 rounds is going to be massive. Obviously, take out Origin period, depending on if one of them makes the squad. I don't think they will next year, but depending on if they do, it could play a factor. But having them all together playing consistent footy for majority of the season, I think is going to be big. I also think finding out who the hooker is going to be big as well, whether that is Joey Lussick or whether they need to go out into the market and get another one. Figuring that out as well. But look, I mean, that's the thing with the Eels. They could be up there, but they could also not be up there. And we've seen that over the past 2 or 3 years with the Eels as well. So look, it is a big call. I've actually got the Raiders in 14th. I think that without a clear 5'8" going into next year, it's trouble signs. They had Matt Frawley. The fact that they let Matt Frawley go blows my mind, because he, for me, was the shoo-in after obviously the announcement came that Jack Whiten was going to go to the Rabbitohs. Every time that Matt Frawley came in, I was so impressed with the footy that he played, particularly the first game he played this year where he scored that try, stepping on the inside and running straight through the middle of a defense. I forgot who the team was. But
moment.
He was fantastic, absolutely fantastic when he's come in this season. I really do think, though, without Jack Whiten and Matt Frawley, that it's going to be very hard. Now, they've signed KO Weeks from Manly, who I think is more of a fullback than a 6, but we could see that change come round 1. They've also signed Simi Sasagi, who is still quite young himself. He's a 5'8", hasn't really had too much first grade, and when he has come in, he's played centre for Newcastle. It's going to be very interesting to see how this side shapes up, but I think they're in a little bit more trouble than the Eels are, because they don't know who their 6 is in round 1. I don't know who their 6 is for sure in round 1. There was talk of Seb Chris playing 6, and that scares me. I don't know. It's very unclear for me. I couldn't tell you who's playing fullback either, to be honest. I'd love Jordan Rapiner to stay there, but I couldn't tell you. I really couldn't, because a year ago, Xavier Savage was the plan, and now he's playing reserve grade as well.
That's right. That's right. Look, like I said, Eels, Raiders, and Rabbits. 13th Raiders, 12th Rabbits for me. I'm sorry if that kicks on your pod a little bit quickly, but they're the 3 teams I've seen a bit of free fall. I predict a bit of pain there, yeah. I don't think Arthur will survive the year. I think Demetriou will, because Rabbitohs aren't the kind of club that just reacts to things at the minute. But I do think that I don't like the way people talk about Latrell Mitchell.
No.
And it's really harsh. He's a good footballer, but I also think he owes the Rabbits a lot more too, as well. So, and something, he's not playing as much as he did when he played for the Roosters. So I think somebody put a stat on Twitter, or X as it's now called, that in a couple of years at the Roosters versus a couple of years at South, he played almost twice as many games. And that comes down to the injury management and the way he's looking after himself and this, that, and the other. So, yeah, I sort of group those teams together, mate. And, yeah, it could be a completely different order as well. but yeah, that's roughly where I have those 3 teams.
Well, let's talk about the Raiders and the Rabbits for a second. I've spoken at length about the Raiders, but I do want to get your thoughts on a few things that I've said as well. But with the Rabbitohs as well, one, I've got a few big calls for the Rabbitohs going into next year in terms of where their lineup is. I think that Latrell's a centre. I think they need to move him back into the centres, not at fullback.
Agreed.
I think that they should have kept Blake Taft, but I think now that they've signed Jack Whiten, I'd even consider starting him at fullback to start the year and condition him at the 1. I'd have Dean Hawkins at 7, and I think Lachlan Ilias needs to play a few more games of New South Wales Cup. I think he debuted a little bit too early, and then they sort of kept him there as the plan, and it hasn't really worked out, because I feel like Cody Walker is the type of player that needs someone to take the reins, and then he just plays his footy. Whereas a few times when in big games where Lachlan Ilias needed to take the reins, there's a few games at the start of the year where he was fantastic, but a few times where he needed to be the main guy, where he needed to take the reins and allow Cody Walker to play his footy, he didn't. And he sort of got a little bit frightened. He sort of stood back a little bit, and Cody Walker just had to take all of the responsibility on himself. And it caused a bunch of errors because Cody Walker was getting his hands on the footy a little bit more than he should have. He was forced to kick on last tackle a little bit more than he should be. And yeah, I feel like with Dean Hawkins and the footy that I've seen him play in reserve grade this year, and it's the reason he's the New South Wales Cup Player of the Year this year as well. He was the controlling halfback, and Blake Taft probably had a massive year as well, whether it be at 6 or at 1, because he was freed up so much by Dean Hawkins as well. So firstly, thoughts on what I've said about the Raiders, and secondly, what separates the Rabbitohs and the Raiders for you as well, in terms of you've had the Rabbitohs at 12th and the Raiders at 13th.
Like I said, they could come in any order. I'll deal with your second question first. The only thing that separates them to me is that the Raiders have lost Jack Whiten and the Rabbitohs have gained him. So, and also the Rabbits have some red in their jersey and Canberra don't. What strikes me about what you said, though, you said you don't know what the halves combination will be in the fullback, or you'd change something. This hasn't worked. That hasn't worked. This year's 2 grand finalists. We know who their 1, 6, and 7 is going to be next year, don't we?
Yep.
And that is so important, mate. You're 1, 6, and 7. And any conjecture around that now is a problem. So, and I can link it to what you said about the Eels. You said the Eels are going to be better because the 3 players are going to be playing together for hopefully the whole season. That is so important. And Ricky's having a rebuilding year. That's why he didn't take the New South Wales job. I think the Rabbits are having a real almost identity crisis at the minute too, because you got to remember a lot of their success was built around 4 Burgess boys and then 3 Burgess boys and 2 Burgess boys. And Sam Burgess was a real cultural figure in that club. And, obviously a few heads have butted and he's not there anymore. So real testing time for Rabbits. In all seriousness about separating them, mate, I'm going to sit on the fence and say, it could be Rabbits in 13th and Raiders at 12th. I think that's how close it's going to be. It could be the Eels above both of them, but I'm just literally I'm thinking to myself, well, the Rabbits have got White and the Raiders lost him, so we'll put the Rabbits above Raiders. That's sort of like my level of thought there.
Yeah, well, look, I totally agree, to be honest. And it sort of makes me sit back and look at what I've picked as well in terms of my top 8 and sort of reconsider a few things, but I'm going to keep it how it is. I have at 13th the Bulldogs. We discussed them at length before, but I think what puts the Bulldogs only 2 positions higher, but what puts them higher for me is if Toby Sexton plays some good football and their forwards next year, which is a pretty decent forward pack, get on song, then I think that they're going to play some pretty decent footy. They're going to win maybe 1 or 2 more games compared to last year as well. I think that their backline is scary. They have Blake Taft, for me, would be the fullback for them. And, being hyper successful in New South Wales Cup last year, and obviously heavily watched by Serraldo as well. I think that he's going to be really good with the spine, with Burton, and going down that left-hand side with Addo Carr. Paul Alamotti not there anymore, which I think is massive. But the backline that they've got at the moment is scary as well. They've got Blake Taff at fullback. They've got Bronson Sherry and Stephen Crichton in the centers. They've got Addo Carr and Carraz on the wings. That is a deadly backline. I think that is going to be really dangerous going into next year. Stephen Crichton in that left-hand side with Taff, with Addo Carr, potentially Viliami Kikau as well. They've got the formula to win. And we talked about this with the Tigers before, and we talked a little bit with the Bulldogs as well. It's about having the right formula in order for them to have success. If they figure all that out, it's what separates them from 15th and 13th. For me, I think they'll go a little bit better than last year off the back of figuring some things out in terms of how their side is structured. But yeah, obviously we've talked at length about the Bulldogs. 12th for me, and this is where I think our heads butt a little bit, is the Tigers. I think that it is going to be near impossible. And yes, as we said before, I said this last year, but it is going to be near impossible for them to be a wooden spoon side with this side that they've got this year, especially if, one, Benji Marshall is successful, and two, everything is consistent in terms of how their lineup comes out each week. We see Jerame at fullback every week. We see Aiden Caesar at halfback every week. We see Jaden Sullivan at 5'8" every week. Api Coruscant at 9 every week. We see the spine consistent. That's what separates them for me between 12th and the spoon. I think that they're going to figure a few more things out during the year. Their side's going to be a lot more consistent for me, or it needs to be more consistent for me. And I think they're going to have a little bit more success. They're definitely, by no sense of the word, going to be a top team in this competition this year. But I think they're building the right way to, in the future, be a successful team. I think that is what separates them, for me, between last and 12th. And again, as we said before, for me, I don't think there's going to be too many points separating the bottom 8 sides. I think it is literally going to be 6 points maximum that is going to separate last from 9th, realistically. So,
and I think that's backed up by history too. I mean, the last couple of years of the comp have been very, very much in that vein. Are you ready for us to agree on something?
I am.
Are you sure you're ready for this?
I'm definitely ready for it, Lee. I'm looking forward to it.
I agree with your choice in 11th.
You do?
Because they're another team that Todd Payton's first year, they finished outside the 8. Second year, they did really well. Yeah, last year, they finished outside the 8 again. So they're yo-yoing.
Mm.
And I think that they're a bit more. When teams yo-yo, it means they either overachieved or they underachieved. And I'm going with the overachieved in 2022 theory.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, we'll let you know who that side is now. It's the Cowboys. If you didn't pick that up before, we both got them at 11th. There we go. That's nice to agree with you for once, Lee. It's very nice. Yeah, no, the Cowboys for me, I think their footy improves, but with how, and we literally just talked about this, with how even 9th to 17th is going to be, I see them at 11th. I see them at 11th, even though I think that Scott Drinkwater is going to have a massive year next year. Him and Tom Dearden, that combination down the left-hand side of their attack is deadly. And the fact that Dearden's now decided to, up his running game a little bit more compared to when he was at Brisbane, and especially when he debuted, he was way more of a controlling, kicking halfback. Whereas now he's a running 5'8", and he's very good at what he does.
I'm a very big Dearden fan.
And I think that as well, that has allowed Chad Townsend to take charge of this side a little bit more, as well as the controlling halfback to steer the ship. And then again, you flip it back, it frees up Dearden and Scott Drinkwater. Scott Drinkwater plays like a second 5'8" as well. And down that left-hand side with Valentine Holmes, who gets 250 meters per game, even when he's not heavily involved, it is going to be a pretty decent year. I think, though, the only thing that separates them from the top 8 for me is the fact that they're losing 5 forwards next year from their rotation, which really hurts their depth. And that's what puts them in 11th for me. I think that it's really going to hurt them, the amount of forwards they're losing. And the fact that Peter Hiku's gone, Zach Laybutt does come in, but Valentine Holmes is suspended for the first, I think, 2 games of the season as well, depending on if he takes the suspension in the World Cup. That's going to hurt them a little bit. And I think it's going to be a rough start, but I do think that they are going to be in and around 11th, and I think it's going to be very close. What are your thoughts on Cowboys 11th? Why have you got them there?
Basically for the reasons I said, in terms of, do you remember Todd Payton came in as a bit of a change agent? Do you remember he made Jason Tamalolo sit out for a while and whatnot? Well, he was sort of vindicated last year in doing that, But then this year they've completely missed out. And Gus Gould keeps saying Cowboys can win the comp. Cowboys can win the comp. He kept saying that. He also said the Tigers were a real good side and they're going to come good. But they didn't. And neither did the Cowboys. And there's reasons for that. And people quite often look at the attack and what the attacking formations are and the combinations and everything. But defending the football and staying in a game for so long is important as well. And there's just something missing at the Cowboys. But you got to remember, when we're getting into this 9th, 10th, 11th territory, they might miss out on the 8 by points difference, 1 point, 2 points. So, put somebody in 8th and all of a sudden they've had a great season. Put them in 9th and they failed. So, I'm not necessarily saying they're going to have a bad season. They're going to have close to a winning season, but I just think that there's a lot more to fix there than is apparent. I look back at the successful Cowboys side, and people, focus quite rightly on Jonathan Thurston's role. But Matt Scott, one of the best front rowers ever to play the game. And have they replaced him at the Cowboys? I would argue they haven't. To me, Matt Scott was up there with Webke and players like that. He was really, really, really good. One of my favourite players of the last 30 years, Matt Scott. And he was a real reason why they got to those couple of grand finals. Michael Morgan, did they ever replace him? JT, how do you replace JT? So, yeah, definitely coming back to the pack, that's for sure.
I think as well, that Ruben Cotter is now my 13. I don't think that he is in the front row anymore. I think that Jason Taumalolo is going to be a rotation front rower going into next year as well. I'd much prefer him as a rotation front rower, particularly with how this side's coming together. I think that it suits the team a little bit more as well. But Ruben Cotter, just the ball playing and the amount of layers that he has in his game, I think he suits the 13 more, especially in today's day and age where we see, smaller past halves that have big builds playing in the 13 jersey, and it's working really well, just those ball playing 13s. I think he could kill it at that role. I really do. So I think that he'll probably transition into the lock forward role next year. And I do think that Jason Taumalolo would do a great job, more so as a front rower than a lock forward playing 60 to 80 minutes of football, getting hammered. I think that it could suit Jason Taumalolo's game a little bit more as well. But 11th is where we see the Cowboys going. I'm glad we can agree. Are you going to have another miracle here, Lee? Are you going to agree with me again on who I have at 10th, or are you going in another direction?
Calm down, Les. We're not going to agree too much. In 10th, the Knights.
Whoa, big call, Lee. Big call.
People are getting carried away. People are getting carried away about the Knights. How many games did they put together at the end of the year? 7?
I think they looked good after Origin. After KP came back, I thought they were...
Don't disagree. But what's going to happen next year with KP?
Play fullback again. Good.
But he'll also be in the Origin mix. And he does get injured. And am I right in thinking one of the Safiti boys is gone or going?
I think Daniel, there was rumours Daniel... Well, I don't read into that too much, but there are rumors that Daniel maybe potentially, but again, I don't know. It's hard to tell. There's 100 rumors that come out. You can't pinpoint one, I guess, and say that's true. That's not. We'll have to wait and see.
My disclaimer now we're in this territory is 10th could also finish 6th.
Yeah.
7th, that's how close it all is after the top 4, basically. But yeah, whenever you look at a team that makes a late run, or a team that makes a grand final one year and doesn't the year after and finishes 9th, or the prelim and outside the 8, you've got to hedge your bets one way or the other. There's not that many teams who yo-yo constantly. A lot of teams yo-yo for a bit and then continue to drop. and they yo-yo because they don't have the mental resilience to stay at the top.
Hmm.
And I still think the Knights have still got those issues. What they did at the end of this year was brilliant. But at the same time, I don't think they're sitting here and building a competition winning system there either.
Hmm.
You know, neither of us have got them winning the title, have we? I mean, the top four one of the top four tends to win the title. So, you know, the next progression, the natural progression for finishing in the 8 will be to finish in the 4. And neither of us have got that. It's not that long ago they were talking about finding other coaches instead of Adam O'Brien.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
We
Like,
were talking about that the last time we had a conversation too. We were talking about that at the start of last year or at the back end of last 2 years ago. Like we were talking about the same thing. So,
and they met with other coaches.
Hmm.
They met with other coaches. And now he's the best thing since sliced bread. Oh, come on, hang on. Which one is it? You know? So, yeah, unfortunately, I just think the Knights are going to come back to the pack a bit.
Yeah, look, again, very, very interesting to see where they end up. I've got them a little bit higher, but we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to it. I've got the Sharks in 10th. I thought that in stages this season, it almost felt like Nico Hines and Blake Brayley versus the world a little bit, especially during that period where Will Kennedy was sitting out, obviously due to injury. It just felt like when in the big moments, when they needed more than one player to come in and you know, change the game, it always fell on just Nico Hines. Blake Brayley was a big help as well, though. At 9, I thought that he had a terrific season in terms of how 9s were going this year. I think that he was in the top 3 for 9s this year as well, just with how he was playing and how the side looked when they were on. But it did feel like in some big games, especially during games against top 8 sides, when they needed more than one player to stand up, it just felt like it was Nico Hines versus the world. Now, they haven't got too many guys. In fact, they haven't got any guys coming in terms of guys that are new going into next season, which again concerns me a little bit as well. But I just feel like it's going to be the same again. And again, I don't know who the 6 is next year because I can't confidently say that it's going to be Matt Moylan because I thought that Braden Trindle ended the year really well. And it almost was like Braden Trindle freed up Nico Hines to play his footy. So I guess another thing to say about the Sharks is that I would have Trindle at 7 and Hines at 6 going into next year.
I don't disagree with that. And, you know, for the same reasons I've been saying the other things, Sharks have actually consistently made the top 8 now the last 2 years. I know they dropped a little bit, but on their day, they were one of the best sides in this competition. They could rattle up the points. They put some teams away really well. What they did, though, this year was a slightly soft underbelly at times. If this was their bad year and the previous year was their good year, if their bad was only 6th or whatever it was, 7th, that's not too far down, is it? The Eels had a bad year. They were down in 9th. The Cowboys had a bad year. They were 10th or whatever it was.
Mm.
If the Sharks had a slightly worse year and they were still in the 8, that's not a bad place to yo-yo to, is it?
Yeah, no, it's not at all. I just think that again, and this is a result of the comp evening out a lot more. I think that the fact that the Sharks really struggled a lot to get it done against top 8 sides last year, particularly at the midpoint of the season, I think that's going to be the difference maker. And I think that with the comp evening out even more, teams coming out with outstanding signings and the Sharks sort of staying in the same boat, it's hard when other teams improve and one team stays in the same boat for them to have the same year. So I think that for me, the Sharks are going to be 10th. And unless they have a terrific year and they start doing really well and playing good footy against those top 8 sides, it's going to be hard for me to move them from 10th to into the top 8.
You'll never guess where I'm putting them.
No, we'll find out. We'll find it in a sec. No more spoilers, please, Lee. We've had enough spoilers today. Enough spoilers today. who do you have in your? Do you still have the Dolphins in 9th position?
Yep, yeah, I'm fine with that. Yep,
And do you still have the Titans in 8th position?
yep, I'm fine with those. Yep.
All right. So my 9th is the Parramatta Eels. And we sort of discussed this at nauseum before. The fact that if Gutho, Moses, and Brown play a consistent year of footy together, not only that, but a few guys we haven't mentioned yet are Bryce Cartwright, going from we don't know where this guy's going to be next year to probably one of the better back rowers in form in 2023, along with Ryan Madison playing some very good football as well, whether that be at 13 in the back row or on the bench, played some very good football. And Jermaine Hopgood in the games where Parramatta were playing good football was fantastic. So I think the Eels do improve a little bit, but I don't think they make the 8. I think they miss out. And yeah, look, I mean, they could be anywhere from 9th to 7th for me, but I think that at the back end of the season and with the inconsistency that they're playing with most years, I think that's the one thing that's going to let them down when in their top 8 race. What are your thoughts on Eels at 9th?
I had them in 14th, so I mean, either way, they're missing the 8. I think, again, I've gone from the theory of, well, are they a yo or are they a yo in the yo-yo, you know? And I think they're in a bit of free fall. And like I said, I think Brad Arthur won't see out the year. He's done a long time there, so I wonder if some of his methods are wearing thin. I wonder if he's revamped things enough. Because revamping could mean changing staff and whatnot. I think he's done all right with the Eels. I really do over the years, but I just think his time might be coming to an end.
Again, massive call as well. And I don't think it's that stage yet. But I don't think they're a top 8 side yet. As well. So
no, neither do I. Yeah.
So I think that they're going to be in that 9th position. Now 8th, and from our discussion before, I sort of agree with you a little bit more, but I do think they, if they get things right, they could be there in the 8. The Rabbitohs. I think that they need to improve. I think they're desperate for improvement, and I think they're desperate for a bit of a change up. And obviously, we talked about my prediction before with Jack White at fullback, Dean Hawkins coming into play 7, and Lockie Ilias spending at least up until Origin in New South Wales Cup, just working on his game and becoming that game managing halfback. If he is the plan moving forward, I think that's what he needs to do.
Big Les.
Side.
Big Les.
Yes.
Is my memory serving me correctly and you're a Bunnies fan?
I'm a Bunnies fan.
All right. Well, we need to put a little disclaimer next to this one then.
Oh, there's no bias.
Aye.
I'm trying not to.
You're looking through tinted glasses at this, lad.
I am not. No way. Not a chance. So that, but also Latrell moving back to center. A lot of people said he goes missing in games at center, and he does. It's a fair shout. But the good thing about Latrell Mitchell is he comes in and he has big moments. The fact that I don't think it's going to work making him have the big moments all the time. He's just not that player. He's not the player that is all the time having these big moments. At center, getting him the ball when he wants it and letting him have the big moments, I think suits the Rabbitohs much better. I think they'll be more successful.
When he's in center, he gets one-on-one with his opposite number quite a lot. And when Latrell's one-on-one with someone,
Latrell wins.
Latrell tends to win.
Yeah. Which I like that as well. Getting him on one-on-one with defenders, and making that combination between Latrell and Cody on that left-hand side as well, I think would be great.
Whereas at fullback, the opposition can kick in a position to turn him round and then bring a kick chase team that put a lot of pressure on him and swarm him. And that's different from getting an early ball and being one-on-one with his opposite number. So is it confirmed he's going into the centres?
No, it's not confirmed. This is purely a take from me.
This is if you're the coach.
Yeah, exactly. This is if Leroy was Jason Demetrio, what would you pick?
Yeah.
And that's what I would go with. What are your thoughts though? We didn't really talk about what you thought about Jack Whiten playing fullback. Now, obviously, he came into the competition to play fullback. What are your thoughts on him starting the year at the number 1?
How much fullback has he played?
He played his first few years at fullback. I think he played at least 2 to 3 years at fullback, potentially. I could be totally wrong there, but I'm pretty sure he played at least his first year at fullback.
I would imagine he's a bit heavier than he was then. A few more niggles. Not quite as sprightly. I have no doubt he can organise a defensive line really well. I don't buy into this that Jack Whiten is a signing that's going to turn them from pretenders to winners. You know, he's at the wrong end of his age scale. What I do think is that obviously he's related to Latrell, isn't he? So there could be some synergies there. The Walker at 5'8", that one, Demetriou seemed to not get the best out of him this year. Was Wayne Bennett had him humming, you know? And I found the Rabbits' attack really, really predictable when I watched them.
Oh, I can agree with that. Yeah, I thought that they were a lot less sparky and a lot less unpredictable, which is basically the mainstay of Latrell's game as well. So, yeah, I can agree with that. They were a lot more predictable, I guess, in attack. But I don't know. I just feel like they need a redemption. I feel like they're going to get it. I feel like Cody knows he didn't have the best year as well. And I feel like Latrell knows he didn't have the best year as well. So getting them into the preseason early, potentially getting him into preseason when all the new guys are coming in, all the development players are coming in, and just get them started early, get them humming early, and just get them ready for the season, I think is going to be a big thing. And just get their discipline a little bit better as well. I feel like that's going to be a big thing going into this year, just the discipline from both of those guys. There was a lot of games at the back end of the year where you said it was the biggest slip. I remember you saying before, we talked about this with the Tigers, where they went from not wanting to win to wanting to win. I feel like it was the exact flip opposite of that for South Sydney, where it was like they really wanted to win and they were perceived as this top side in the competition. And all of a sudden they just didn't want to be there. So yeah. I think that mindset needs to change, and I think it will. And I think they know they had a bad year, and I think they can correct it going into next year. I just don't see that happening with Latrell at fullback. I think that he's a center, and I think that he needs to come in for the big moments a little bit less. Because he does make a lot of errors too when they're constantly trying to get him the ball and get him to make the big moments when he sort of doesn't. He isn't prepared to make the big moment or the big play when he doesn't see it in front of him, I guess.
Yeah, look, mate, I'm going to go back. You still, being a Rabbitohs fan, there needs to be a massive disclaimer next to anything you say pertaining to this club. Don't give them any more airtime than any other team, mate, because then people they'll question your impartiality, and we can't be having that now, mate, can we? No, in all jokes aside, what I got from what you were saying, there's quite a lot of questions that need answering, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And I think that next year, while I think it could be a slow start to start the year, I think they do get back into the 8 and back to where they were 2 years ago. I think that could happen.
For your sake, my friend, and I've got a few other Rabbitohs mates. I hope you're right.
I hope I'm right as well. 7th position. Who have you got at 7th this season?
Manly Warringah Sea Eagles.
Right. So we don't have too different of an opinion at all, to be honest.
No. I think from here on in, we're basically just arranging the deck chairs, aren't we?
Yeah, I think it's very, very similar from here on in too. Talk to me about Manly. Why are they 7th for you?
I think Luke Brooks is a great addition. I think the best thing he could do was get away from the West Tigers. He's a handy footballer who tried to overplay his hand all the time because of the press he was getting. And I think playing with DCE will be great for him. And I think DCE is in another prime of his life again. So, I think they've got two bloody good halves there.
I think I think that was a big thing when I was sort of talking about it on my podcast about this signing Luke Brooks, the big thing that I was talking about was what you just said then, the fact that Luke Brooks isn't an organising 7. He is a running 5'8" at his best. And I think that is going to be really good for Manly. Not only that, but we know who the Manly spine is going to be now. I think it's pretty clear that Schuster isn't going to be the 6 going into next year. It's going to be Luke Brooks. And I think that combination is going to be very, very telling. And I think that's why we've got them in very similar positions next season.
And I think Turbo's due to be fit again, so if he gets really badly injured again, I mean, that we could be talking about the end of him, but so I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to be on the field more than not next year. So, and Jake Trbojevic is the spiritual sort of leader of that place in many ways, I think. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of good players there, and I think they're going to be in 7th. I'm putting them at 7th and not higher, just because a lot of these positions depend on the draw, lad. Like they, if you remember under Des, they finished top 4 one year, the COVID year, and then the year after they finished 9th. But in many ways, if you compare the two and the draw that they had, they actually finished very similar. It was like par both years, and it was literally because of the draw. But I just think Manly are going to move up a couple of rungs this year. I think they're establishing a new identity post Des Hasler. I know there's a court case going on, but I do know that there's some powerful figures in certain places who support that club hugely, and it's not easy to rock a place like Manly. Have you noticed that club never gets real sort of
they don't get
negative press. They've got some supporters in high places. So yeah, and I'm not an anti-Seabold person either. I think he's an intelligent bloke.
I think that Mick Ennis coming in next year is going to be big too.
I agree. So everything, to me, just incremental improvement with Manly next couple of years.
Do you want to hear a big call from me? Just sort of go with what you were saying about preventing Tom Trbojevic getting injured.
I reckon half the things you've said down here have been big calls, but go on.
There's a lot of them. I like making big calls. That's why they call me Big Les. That's why they call me Big Les, because I make big calls. Tom Trbojevic to centre to start the year, Ruben Garrick at fullback. I think that's probably the best idea for Manly in terms of preventing injury. Now, by Origin, if it doesn't work out, you're more than welcome to move Tommy back to fullback. But I think to start the year, for me, I'd have Tom Trbojevic at centre with Garrick at fullback, because I think the footy that I saw from Garrick for majority of the time last year that he was at fullback, I was pretty convinced he was a fullback, not a winger, not a centre. And I think he could do a great job while Tom Trbojevic is sort of getting the runs back in his legs again. So, yeah, look, at least to start the year, I've got Tom Trbojevic at centre most likely. What are your thoughts on that one?
Thank you, Les, for your choices. You've got to keep Turbo at fullback. There's been no player apart from Ponga this year, I suppose, single-handedly drag a team up a ladder from a certain position. Why you take him away from that position, I don't know. Especially the money he's on.
I'm just thinking a temporary more so move, not a permanent switch. More so just for the first few weeks, just while he's getting the runs back in his legs.
That would also be a bit of an experiment. And I don't think Manly can start the year experimenting.
It's fair enough. It's fair enough. I just think that the reason that Tom Trbojevic is getting injured so frequently, not only is just because the injuries that he's getting are very high cases of free injury, but it's because as soon as he comes back, they're expecting him to be Tom Trbojevic again. And they're treating him like he's a fully fit, ready to go Tom Trbojevic when he's still trying to get the runs back in his legs. And there was one stage during last year, I thought they brought him back a little bit too early. I don't think he should have played round one. But
possibly. Did he have the hamstring trip mid-season or pre-season last year?
He had multiple. I think he redid it during the preseason. And yeah, I think he had one or two injuries during the preseason actually. And there was a lot of conjecture about whether they should have bring him back round one, where he should come back round one. And
I think Manly have to do, pardon my language, shit or bust with Tommy Turbo. I think, you got to put your best players in the best position, I think.
Yeah. Well, look, very keen to see what happens next year. I do think that I do think that they need to sort of at least let Tom get the runs back in his legs. I think letting go of KO Weeks hurts them a little bit as well because they do lose a little bit of depth at fullback. If worst comes to worst and both Garrick and Turbo are unavailable as well. But I don't know. I just feel like that Manly need to let Tom Trbojevic allow himself to get back to that stage where he was single-handedly, as you said, moving Manly up the ladder. But look, very keen to see what happens with Manly next year. Very keen.
And I can't disagree with your theory either. I can't disagree with it. That just wouldn't be my choice. That's all.
Yeah. For me, 7th. And obviously, again, it's not too far apart here, but I've got Newcastle making the ad again. I think that they could have their late stretch. They could be a very similar season, but I think with the team they've got now, I was very impressed with Gamble at 6 coming in. A lot of people said he's a reserve grader coming into first grade when Callum Ponga went back to fullback at first, and obviously Tyson Gamble just came in. He was obviously playing a lot of bench hooker before he was coming in to play 6. And he came in, I thought as soon as he came in with Hastings, I thought that combination pretty much, not instantly, but after the first 2 or 3 weeks, it clicked really well. And I thought that I think they complement each other's games really well as well. And I think it's a big part of how they were, successful towards the back end of the year. But Kalen Ponga back at fullback, it was pretty much proved before he even went to 5'8" during the year that he was a fullback, and he proved it at the back end of the year as well. And he was one of the more dominant fullbacks, fully fit as well. I think Knights finished 7th. I think they finished exactly where they finished this year. I think they have a pretty decent year getting into the 8. Thoughts on Knights at 7th?
Well, I spoke in detail about the Knights earlier. Could happen. They're my thoughts. It could happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go into 6. Who do you have in the number 6?
New Zealand Warriors.
There we go. Again, not too far off at all. Talk to me about the Warriors. Why do you see them getting into the top 8 again next year?
Again, there's some accusations that their draw wasn't the toughest, but I think the coach has done really well. They're a together group. Sean Johnson has still got a bit more football in him. I think he will start the season well because he didn't get the Dally M. And I just think that change, I think there's a bit more sustainability that change. The players just look so happy this year. Dallin Watene-Zelezniak played the best football I've seen him play. Sean Johnson, some of the best football I've seen him play. So a happy club. And like you said, you've not got them too far away either. I mean, we're talking tomato now, aren't we, in terms of some of the positions here? I think the coach is doing well there.
Yeah.
I see it stabilizing. I think that's stabilizing. I know were they 3rd or 4th?
They were 4th. Melbourne just got them in the end.
I mean, 4th and 6th is not that bad a drop. So,
especially with previous seasons as well.
That's right.
I actually don't even think we can look at the Warriors like that anymore either. I think we have to look at them as a top 8 side because they've proved that they can do it now. So we've got to look at them in that manner as well. And I think that, again, you said that Sean Johnson's played the best footy we've seen him play for a while. I think that also comes off the back of him recognizing that he hasn't got as much run in his legs as he did, a few years ago when he was really.
I think he's done that. And I think that's why he's evolved.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. He's evolved into a game managing and a very successful halfback as well, with a little bit of flair still in him, but he's really taken on a game managing role, which allows his 5'8" to play good footy as well. I think the 5'8" next year isn't Tamari Martin. I think it's Luke Metcalf, because for the majority of the season when he played, I thought he was probably the best pick, Luke Metcalf. I thought he was outstanding when he came in there. So I think they've got the medicine to win and win well this season, and get a lot of wins on the board. I think that, we don't have them far apart at all. And I think that's where they are. My sixth is Manly. And again, we talked Manly ad nauseum. If they get it right and Tom is fit, they'll be successful. Who's your fifth team?
The Melbourne Storm.
Again, tomato, tomato. Talk to me about Melbourne.
I see a slight dip in their standards every year. Just a small, maybe not the standards of what they're putting out in the training paddock and everything else, just in terms of some of the players they've got in positions. And I mean, any club that loses Cameron Smith, Billy Slater, Cooper Cronk,
and all their forwards,
it's very hard to replace. I think I'd like you to look at the Storm being in fifth as a compliment, as opposed to as a compliment to their system.
Yeah.
Rather than, they've got a coaching staff that make them bigger than the sum of their parts.
Exactly. I totally agree as well. And you can never write off Melbourne, particularly when you're looking at where they're going to be next year, because they can always come and surprise you. I think that Tarek Sims from the forwards being a bit more of experience is a big loss. Now, a lot of people are going to say, yeah, but he was in and out of reserve grade this season. But he was an experienced forward. And by the end of the year, it told, because he came in and he really upped the intensity of the forward pack. I thought he had some really decent games towards the back end of the year. And in finals, I thought he was great.
Bellyache's got a bit of a history of doing that, just taking players for a season or mid-season. Everyone thinks, why has he signed him? And then them really performing well for half the year and helping them get home. But he also knows when to get rid of them too. So
I think another factor that sort of decides where they are next year as well is Ryan Papenhuyzen and his fitness and his injury. His injuries. If he's injured for all year again next year, and if they don't sign some more forwards, I think that's going to be a big focus of their preseason and off-season, is signing forwards. But if Ryan Papenhuyzen's not fit again, it could be very different to how we see it. Again, you can't write off the Melbourne Storm, though, because they are a really successful organisation. When you got a spine, even with Nick Meaney at fullback, with Cam Munster, Jerome Hughes and Harry Grant all there, it's very hard to write them off. And Josh King, another guy we haven't spoken about in the 13, I thought he did a terrific job this season as well. So, look, you can never write off Melbourne, and that's why we've got them so highly as well. At fifth, I've got the Warriors. Again, we talked about them ad nauseum. We know why they're going to be successful going into next year as well. We just hope that everything clicks with them. Who's number 4?
Sharkies.
Very different to me there.
Yeah. I just believe in what they're building there.
Yeah.
And I explained that one earlier, I think. So, but yeah, that's where I've got them.
I don't know, but the reason I've got them 10th is because, as we said before, that it's very Nico Hines versus the world sometimes. I think if Trindle's there at the 7 and Hines is at the 6, I think they can go a lot better, though, with a controlling halfback steering the ship and Hines being freed up to play his footy. Yes, he had a great game in that Indigenous game where he came in and played 7. And obviously in the Indigenous game after that as well. He had some really great games in the number 7 jersey. And obviously had some big standout games in the number 7, but he can't always be the guy that changes everything. There's got to be more than one. It can't just be him. He has to be in the 6 to be free to play his footy and contribute to games in that aspect rather than being the main guy in the 7. Let someone else steer the ship. Let someone else, control the side and have the reins, but then also let him then come in and have his say in games, provide X factor, and coming to games that way, I think is going to be big for them as well, going into next year. But we'll have to wait and see how that side is structured. And Blake Brayley, I think, was a telling part of their success as well in their forward pack. Why else? Why don't you have them as low as I do, I guess? And why do you rate them so highly to get in the top 4? Because it's a big call, and we had them at 4th last year, and they didn't get there.
Well, as I said, I just think that they've had a trickier year this year, but they only dropped down to what, 6th?
Yeah.
Or 7th?
Yeah.
And so that's quite a good place to fall down to.
Yeah.
And actually, their side is still quite young.
Yeah.
So, people will say, "Oh, the Broncos, young side, they'll get better." Well, Cronulla Sharks are the same. They're allowed to get better too. So, that's why I've got them up there.
Yeah.
You're gonna be so excited soon.
I know. I feel I could sense that we've got another agreement coming. I've got Melbourne in 4th for basically all the reasons we were talking about before. Never write them off. They're always a successful franchise. I think they get into the top 4. 3rd for you. Who have you got? I have a feeling I know who you've got there.
The same who you've got.
Love it when we agree, Lee. Love it when we agree. Why have you got them in 3rd?
They've got to. They've got to this year. Next year, sorry. They've got to. Or else I think you have to start asking questions of the coach. I do think their football can be a bit predictable sometimes. They've not changed the style much. Obviously, their fullback, somebody I'm really close to. You think about Tedesco, right? There's not many fullbacks in the history of Australian Rugby League who've had to compete with as many fullbacks to keep their Australian and New South Wales jumper.
Yeah.
So the people who've been after his New South Wales jumper, Pappenhausen, Turbo, right?
Yeah.
Gutho. Players in other eras who might have got that jumper. People after his, and now Dylan Edwards. Australian jersey, Reece Walsh. That is an awful lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And Teddy just keeps rising. He had a bit of a slow campaign at times this year, but the back end of his season was really good again. He's a consummate professional. I'll be honest, I don't think captaincy suits him perfectly, hand in glove. And he takes the pressure on.
Yeah.
But I just think they can't not.
Get there.
They've got to learn the lessons. Each year they've left the run so late.
Yeah.
That they've run out of gas when they got to the finals. They can't do that next year. That's a coaching and preparation thing.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I've got them there for pretty much the exact same reasons. I think that Sam Walker, towards the back end of the year, coming back from injury, I thought it's probably the best football I've seen from him. And I think that there was a lot of questions around, can he be a controlling halfback in this side? Can he take on that role? Can he suit Luke Keary in this team? A lot of the questions were answered in his first game back because he was terrific and he did exactly what we thought he could do and what we needed, well, the Roosters needed him to do as well. So yeah, look, I mean, I've got them there for the exact same reasons, and I agree with you. They can't leave it to last minute. They've got to be successful for a larger part of the season, and some of their signings this year are fucking outstanding. One that stands out to me, sorry for the language too there, Lee, but one that stands out for me is the signing of Spencer Leniu off the bench.
Yep.
Huge.
And also Dom Young, another finisher.
Yeah. Dom Young is going to be massive as well on the wing. And their back line next year,
It's like a basketball team. Tall.
I know. If all goes well, it's Tupou and Dom Young on the wings, and it's Manu and Suwali in the centers.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
That's unheard of. That's super teams type stuff as well. And then you look at the forwards they've got Terrell May, they've got Lindsay Collins, they've got Spencer Leniu, they've got Jared Warrior-Hargreaves, Stuart Long, who had a big end to the year, the Butcher boys.
Yeah.
If this team doesn't get to 3rd, I will be.
And from third, they can launch a premiership charge too. So third, I think Trent Robinson needs to get them have a good start, accept that they might get battered a bit during Origin, and then rebuild and pick it up again, and then be in the top 4. So yeah, agreement all round.
Well, let's talk. Let's keep this agreement going, Lee. Who do you have at second?
Same as you.
We go. Love it. Love to hear it. Tell me why you think the Broncos are going to be there.
Again, a lot of players that have grown up together last few years. I do think, though, and one thing that's not possible on the way we've talked about the ladder here is that I think the Panthers are going to be well clear of them this year. So I think the Broncos are going to stutter a little bit more this year, next year. You can't lose players of the caliber of Herbie Farnworth and Flegler and not feel something.
Yeah. I agree. I think that they've got good guys to come into those spots, though, which is, I think, a positive. Fletcher Baker to the Broncos. I think that's a pretty decent signing. I think that he'll start too with Payne. I think the rotation will be quite similar to last year. Because I think Fletcher Baker, he's definitely no Tom Flegler, but he can play the role of a starting front rower who starts the game well, sets the tone through the middle, and then you get your Keenan Palace. Oh, Keenan's obviously gone to the Titans, but you get your Xavier Willisons coming off the bench who just come in and kill it through the middle and are so aggressive. And your Kobe Hetheringtons as well. So I think that it's going to be a very similar rotation. As for Herbie Farnworth's spot, I think that Jesse Arthur's moved to centre. They've recently just signed Corey Oates or re-signed Corey Oates on a 1-year deal for a massive pay cut. I think that he'll return and he'll come back onto the wing. So I think that that's sort of going to be the look for the side. And I think that's not a bad, I guess, change considering that they have lost these guys in Herbie Farnworth and Tom Flegler. So yeah, look, I mean, I think they will be second again. And obviously we've got the same again for number 1, the Penny Panthers. Minor premiers. Talk to me about the Panthers.
I don't know what's left to be said that hasn't been said, to use your commonly used phrase today, ad nauseum. The benchmark club in our competition.
Yeah.
A youth development system that's paid dividends and a lot of players that have played together for a long time. Same with the Broncos. They've just gone around it in a slightly different way. The Panthers players, some of them have played together now for 10 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Because they played in junior systems together.
Fred to feel good for that as well, too, with the junior.
100%. 100%.
So good. What I think they've done very well as well, when they've lost Sean O'Sullivan, they've gone out and gotten a Jack Cogger. Well, now that when they've lost a Jack Cogger, they've gone out and they've got a English halfback, obviously, that played for a little bit for the Raiders as well, in Brad Schneider, who I think is going to be great as a depth guy coming in and playing Origin. And you think about the halves for Origin, it's going to be respectfully, if depending on if Dylan Edwards makes the squad as well, because he could definitely be in and around the squad for Origin next year. But the halves could be Dane Laurie and Brad Schneider during the Origin period.
And I look, it's not that long ago since the grand final. Their completion rate was so high. In the biggest game of the year,
97%.
They just churned out completion after completion after completion after completion. They are a machine.
Yeah.
I actually think 1-17 Broncos are a better side. But the Penrith system is just better.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And losing Stephen Crichton is massive. But I think that Paul Alamotti in that side, I think could be just as great. I think that he has a lot of potential that the Bulldogs were unable to get out of him when he was starting in first grade. And we saw glimpses of his greatness, but I think that the Panthers are just going to make him explode. I think that he is going to be really, really good alongside either a Brian Toto or a Nia Taruba. I think that it's going to be a deadly combination. I really do. I think that they're going to be there again. Are they a grand final winners for 2024?
Any chance you can let me sit on the fence for that one?
I can let you sit on the fence for that one. I can, because we just don't know. We just don't know.
Because what I want you to do with this list, And this podcast, after it's been out for about a week, is just delete it because we're going to have between us, we'll have got loads wrong, won't we?
Probably will, to be honest.
Never listen to any past podcasts where there's predictions, please.
I know, going off our record as well. We've had some good ones. We've had some shockers as well. Lee,
That's
always a pleasure to sit down with you and have a long conversation about rugby league. It is always a pleasure, mate. Thank you.
No, likewise. Thanks for the invite again, mate. And let's not keep it so long next time.
No worries.
As in between drinks, not
exactly
for the pod. You know,
I know what you meant, Lee.
Yeah.
I know you.
Take care, lad.
Thanks for hopping on as well. Make sure you just subscribe to Big LEZ'S League on YouTube as well, and obviously listen to all the podcasts on the Spotify Big LEZ'S League. But Lee, as I said, a pleasure. Talk to me about some of the things coming up for you over the next few weeks.
Keep an eye on the Rugby League Coach socials. Massive announcement about the future of the business.
Well, there you go, Lee. Thank you for hopping on.
Super. Take care now. Bye-bye then.